Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I don't know whether Paul has managed to rejoin. I know that Paul sent me a message the other day saying, you do realise you planned your conference in the middle of the S1000D steering committee. So Paul is probably got a headphone in either ear at the moment, listening to the steering committee.
I'm still here, mate.
You're still there. Cheers, mate. Thanks very much. I know that you tend to get dragged into all of these meetings. So I know that Bill did answer this question for us earlier, but maybe Bill, if you're allowed to, if you could just share again for those that maybe missed it, do we know if the US DoD is going to start mandating or looking at the S-Series specifications? I know you did give us an answer earlier, but I'll let you try and answer that again.
Yes, I'll be happy to expand on that a little bit. Yes, as part of the ART project that I mentioned earlier, they were looking at the benefits of the S-Series specifications. Based on the results of ART, based on the visibility it's gotten, they are currently drafting their contractual specs for starting. I guess the draft is due coming out in 2021, 2022 timeframe, to be finalized after that. That draft does require the use of the S-Series specifications for U.S. Navy support.
Excellent. So I'm sure everybody is frantically now downloading the specifications as we speak. So I'm sure that they're having a good look. So I'm going to go through it. I know that not all of you have been involved in all of the panel discussions that we've had over the last couple of days, but I'm just going to go through this in no particular order. And if you have an opinion, please do chirp and chime in, because I do all the time. So BAE Systems. So that you did generate, Stuart, you're going to regret this. You generated a lot of questions. So you mentioned 2000M. We know that surely. I'm glad that you called it Eurofighter on your slides as well. Now I don't feel so bad every time I get told off. So I won't call it Typhoon. I will call it Eurofighter, and take the punishment later. So, but on the Eurofighter, obviously they're using 2000M. Do you know if there's a plan to migrate to the newer versions of 2000M? So the XML-based versions.
Yes. No, there isn't. This has come up a few times in our discussions. The main reason for that is that there's been a lot of investment by the various EPCs involved, customers, NETMA, and also Eurofighter. And to actually migrate to the later versions, you'd be talking about updating maybe 6 or 7 IT systems, some of which are bespoke, some of which, like ours, is a mainframe. We haven't even got people who can make major change anymore. So it's a major undertaking. So, and in terms of the business benefits and moving across, I think you'd just be moving to the newer standard. I don't think they'd be taking much of an advantage of any changes that were contained therein. So really, I can't see that happening. It's more likely, certainly from a BAE perspective, that any later specs are likely to be related to new products rather than updates.
So, Mike, do you know, from a contracting perspective, or whatever you might put in 0600, are you going to be mandating a specific version of 2000M? Are you going to be looking at the newer XML versions, or are you just going to say we just want 2000M?
At the moment, we just say we recommend 2000M. Our historical implementations, all of which aren't really running anymore, because we used to use, on the Tornado program, which is using the older UN EDIFACT-based standards. To date, I don't believe we've ever contracted for an XML-based implementation of 2000M. Obviously, going forward to the future, the actual services for delivering to Future Log IS will be via the BMFS program. I'm trying to push into them requirements that you must implement any of your logistics services to take 2000M-based data. at the moment, a lot of our legacy IS systems have got the competitor Aegis 9, I think it is, version standard running as well, which is very similar in many ways. It's a selection of XML messages for transactional-based exchanges in the supply chain. So certainly the requirement going forward will be to be used 2000M. Normal mod contracting policy is you contract for the latest version of the standard when you go to contract. I'm going to push it into being the preferred set of data to go with our future log IS services. But those are ill-defined at the moment because that program isn't even funded fully, let alone specifying at low level what those services are going to look like. So it's a case of watch this space. But certainly.
Cheers for that, Mike. And I know that I had a conversation with, let's just say, a hypothetical engine manufacturer who is also using 2000M, and they have no intention right now of migrating massive amounts of 2000M data to the new versions of the XML-based 2000M. And they're not in the UK, so I'll let you figure out who they are. So a good question that came up, and this actually came up for me a couple of months ago with the supply chain, and one may or may not be on this call, and there's only one person in the supply chain. So those that are in the 1388 environment and those that are in the S3000L environment, is there going to be a plan? And Paul, I'm sure you'll have an opinion on this. Is there going to be able to provide guidance on how we can merge data sets from individual suppliers? So we've got one prime supplier that's using 1388, and we've got another supplier that wants to go down the S3000L route. What's the advice to the market that might find themselves in that kind of for that environment? Let's start with you, Paul. I think let's come at it from a spec perspective, and then we'll come at it maybe around the table, see if any. Alan, I'm sure you'll have an opinion on this. So what do you think, Paul? Have I stunned you into silence?
I'm sorry, Mike. Can you repeat the specific question?
Yeah. So the question, and this is a real life question, came in today, and I've had it before from two UK defence primes. One is using 1388, and the other one is planning on using S3000L. How can we merge these data sets? How can we bring these data sets together?
Good question. There are lots of assumptions to make when with answering a question like that. The biggest assumption being that they both would have the same data set. From what I've heard in the US in particular is that there's a reluctance to use S3000M because it's not in the same, it doesn't do the same work that the processes are in place now. I can't remember exactly what it's named, GSA, I think. But there's a misperception in some cases, that S2000M will support initial provisioning, and I don't think it's recognised so much in some projects that they're dealing with initial provisioning using non-S2000M processes, but it is still initial provisioning, and so there's got to be a kind of an extension of thought and understanding about that. But if the data elements are not the same, then that's going to be very difficult. And I imagine even to map those data elements, would be not an insignificant task. So, but it is certainly doable because they're doing the same thing. The spec S2000M is doing the same thing. So it's a difficult question to answer, really.
Yeah, I know it is.
Apologise for that.
It is a difficult one to answer, which is why I went to you first. So, Alan, you sat forward, so I'm assuming you've got an opinion on this.
Okay. I'd like to make a couple of points. I think Paul's right. To try and do it at the global level would be extremely difficult. Trying to bring together every piece of data from two separate standards and harmonize it, if not impossible. I struggle to see how it could be cost effective. But the point I was making at the beginning, the subset of data that you need to make decisions is very, very much smaller. Typically, that subset of data needs to be extracted from tools that deal with the standards to be put into a format that analysis tools can work on, whichever stable they come from. And because that subset is so much smaller, and those are the things that drive cost and availability, I think it may be possible to do it at that level. In other words, make the decisions, and after that, if you've got the right support policies and the right support decisions, then you've got most of the benefit. So my thoughts would be not to try and harmonize it, but to extract what's important, make those decisions, and then quite how you deal with the huge problem downstream in order to drive all the logistics implementation systems, I'll pass on.
Stuart, do you have any thoughts?
Can I just...
Yeah, sorry, go on, Paul. I'll let you jump back in.
Can I just follow up on that? What Alan was saying there is, completely correct and adds to the explanation of how difficult it is. But I go back to my presentation, first couple of slides. I made the statement that the S-Series is the first truly integrated set of ILS specs, and there aren't any others. And the thing that makes all the collection of those specs different is that we, in the S-Series, deal with units of functionality, as I explained, and those units of functionality contain the data elements that other processes that are not S-Series, those data elements are the same. Their attributes and classes may be different, but it's still the same data. But in other specs, it's not collected as units of functionality. And the reason that's an important point is that if you remember Jamie's presentation, he was talking about contracting for data elements by contracting for units of functionality. Mm-hmm. So a project that's not using S2000M would not be collecting its data into what we call units of functionality necessarily in the same way. And so that's what makes it, one of the things that makes it extremely difficult to be able to move from one specification to another, or even to declare that one specification is better than another, especially when you come into the activities described in S2000M. If you use an S2000M as a standalone document, you'll be closer, but not in a implemented fashion because of those units of functionality.
Excellent. Stuart, do you have any thoughts on that?
Probably moving to 3000L as opposed to 2000M. I'd say both, say for example, the DoD standards, the MIL standard standards, probably dealing in the same space, and there's probably a core of the data elements from both and approaches from both of the standards that kind of overlap. I suspect that I know there are, from chatting to the guys on the ground, there are some differences where some of the lower level attributes, just there's more flexibility in the 3000L approach, the data model. And I think sometimes it's a case of actually understanding the underlying mappings between the data there, understanding how you're capturing the data. I think one of the things that we found with using multiple standards is that there is a bit of activity to understand how they interact with each other. And at the moment, we're having to do some of that mapping ourselves manually. People who understand both standards effectively. I don't know if there's anything off the shelf that would give you the relationships between the two. Possibly not. I'm not sure.
No, I don't think a mapping thing, and we've got the best brains around the table here, but one of the common threads that I'm hearing when I'm out working in the industry on my day-to-day job is COT support for these specifications at the moment seems to be lacking. And I think the market's going to catch up, and when they hear messages like "this is where we're going, guys," then obviously the software is going to catch up as well. So Dawn, I know that you're on. Hopefully you can hear us now. I'm not sure, Dawn, but if not, we'll sign language. There was a number of things on your slides that just a number of people asked if they could have copies of your slides. If you're unable to answer, then we'll take Phil's answer. But I'm assuming we can make copies of those slides available.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you perfectly. Do you want to do your presentation again?
I'm assuming you can hear me now, then.
Yes, it's about a number of people asked for copies of your slides. I'm just verifying that it's okay to hand them out.
Yeah, I don't think it's a problem. Everything should be publicly available. I'll run it through the co-chair, Ramon, and just verify with them that he doesn't see any issues with it. But yeah, I think we can share them.
Excellent, perfect. Thanks for that. And it's nice that you can hear us. So
it's nice. Sorry about that.
Phil, we had a question saying, could you explain a bit more about the EDF project that you mentioned during your presentations, and what's the opportunity to get involved?
So yeah, the opportunity is quite interesting because it's directly funded from Brussels, from the European Defence Fund, and it's looking at how the whole network, if you like, of our support solutions can work more coherently across the partner nations, and predominantly it's for the European partner nations, of course. But when they start talking to, they want to have major companies to lead on this, so they're hosting meetings in the DGA in Paris, and they are bringing in companies like Thales and Airbus, and also some of the smaller companies as well, dare I say it, like Dassault Systèmes, who are engaged in this whole through life support element. And what the European Defence Fund is trying to do is give some finance into this, because it's recognised that a lot of development of the specs is done by members of industry who are doing it almost, as we would call it in military, a secondary duty, if you like, rather than their prime job. So they're hoping to put a significant amount of money into the research of how the specs work, how they can be more integrated. So a big element of that money will go towards an instantiation of the PLCS, the product life support, and how AP239 and AP242 can interact. And it is hoped then that will make the digital twin more real, if you like. And coming back to the UK, when we talk digital twins, you'll hear people at Abbey Wood talk about, the 3 stars will talk about they'd like to see a digital twin of Tempest long before the aircraft arrives. And part of the way that's going to arrive is if we get all these standards to talk together properly, so that we have that golden thread, that digital thread, if you like, as it goes through. Oh, brilliant! I've got a cup of coffee on the go as well. Fantastic.
Yeah,
Thank you.
We'll all take one of those.
So the trick is, I think, from a UK perspective, that obviously because there are issues around, and I did mention Brexit earlier, but this is around the European Defence Force, and it's around what does that European Defence Force look like? How does that interact with NATO, and what's the UK's position both within NATO and the European Defence Force? So I am saying to our UK companies, I will, sit at the table in Brussels to represent the UK via our TDI and our GISCOT, but I will bring in partner companies from the UK, and I will also make sure that when a company like Thales has got a very strong position in Paris, Thales London are also actively engaged, so that we've got the UK contingent on board. So I think that's critical for us at the moment. So yeah, the way to get involved is follow what we're doing, because I'm fortunate that I'm invited into these meetings, because I haven't got a personal widget to sell, so I can be viewed as an independent arbiter for UK. So very happy to wave the flag for us.
Yeah, and I think that, the website is teamdefence.info, right? So is that right? Am I right? So, but they're on Twitter, LinkedIn, and you go follow what Team. And I mentioned earlier, if you're not on the mailing list for Team Defence, then you're probably missing a lot of invites to key industry events and lots of educational type things. So make sure you're on there. This one will please Kieran that came in, and this falls into the category of what I say, eating our own dog food. So, and I know in the S1000D community, we're definitely very much doing that, and Paul could definitely talk to that. But is there a plan to use STE when actually writing the specifications? Who wants to go first with that one? I reckon that has to land firmly on Haslam's lap. Have we frightened him?
Sorry, I'm reading S3000L.
Say that again, Paul. We lost you.
I said, I'm sorry, I'm reading S3000L.
Oh, you're reading S3000L. No, so do you know if there's any plans in the production of the specification to actually use simplified technical English to produce the specifications?
Yeah, well, there is information in S10000I that helps with that. And I think the example that I was talking about that would be in that harmonized standalone document, I think that will help.
I know you're going to have the common terminology and dictionary and that kind of stuff, which is definitely going to help, right? So, I don't know, Bill, do you have any thoughts on that?
I will say from the S6000T perspective, when we got into some of our chapters and we were talking about how to draft learning objectives or identifying those skills and abilities, we refer to STE, and so our verb lists were cut down because we did not use, but we used verbs that were in STE and so forth and so on. However, because of some complex knowledge and everything like that, we did steer away from that in some cases. However, we do specify that we should use STE when identifying learning objectives, everything like that. But that's not to say it was specifically used in drafting the spec itself.
Okay. Kieran, I saw you leant forward there when I asked that question. Do you have a thought?
Well, I actually had a question a bit further back from that, because both Dawn and Paul in their presentations talked about defining terminology, and I know there's a terminology working group, and I know I do, and other people talk about the fact that STE is designed to be a sort of common language for the S-Series specifications, except that we've had a whole day talking about the S-Series and STE isn't mentioned really anywhere. So I guess for me, maybe Paul or Dawn, I don't know if you can help me understand, but what was the thinking? How do you see STE performing that function of being the common language, if you like, underpinning the specifications?
Well, in some cases, STE is not appropriate. Mm-hmm. And in fact, in quite a few cases, I've seen, areas where that is part of this problem. And one of the reasons for the terminology working group being established is somewhat my fault, because as I'm editing the specs, it's not just the terminologies, like the example that I gave, that a specification uses customer and what it actually means is maintainer. But it's the language, which is a big problem. So that's because it's different people of different nations using their own, let me say, non-native language when writing these things. They use their own interpretation of particular phrases. So I see quite a lot of the phrase "so as to allow." And that basically means so that. But that's a common thing across European writers, so as to allow. And often see the word please well, pleasing a specification is just not appropriate. And I find that quite often I have to suggest rewording whole paragraphs, just because the language is not appropriate, and also because I have to get rid of the word may and somehow turn it into a can, or the word shall and turn that into a must. And that sometimes, results in changing whole paragraphs or multiple paragraphs. But the application of STE in describing the activities and processes in the specs is going to be difficult. It would be great if, well, that's the objective of the terminology working group, is to make sure that all the authors are using the same terminology and language in the same way that they would be if we were complying with STE. It's an interesting topic, though, Phil. We need to bring that up with council.
We have been discussing it at PSSG, and I have tried to ensure that Orlando, who runs the STE group, has got representation in the terminology working group, because I was quite keen at the start of the year that we weren't using language that were common to the specs that wasn't common to the STE. It seemed almost as if the specifications were saying, oh yes, everybody's got to use STE apart from us. So it was a question of do as we say, not as we do. And I think it is beholden on the specs to use STE as far as they can. And if they get a scenario where they cannot find a suitable word phrase, then they should go back to the STE working group and say, we need to do some work on this and we need an amendment to expand the language. That's what it's all about. It's a living entity, the STE world, and we need to be promoting it. And I think, to be fair, hand on heart, I think the standards, the specifications should be front and centre of promoting the use of STE.
Well, I mean, maybe this is a separate discussion, but and I'd be more than happy to help with this, because the thing about simplified technical English is that I do a lot of work in the UK on plain English, which in the US you call plain language. But the principles embodied in that, which work very well for the type of work that you do in your specifications, which is not pure technical writing in the sense of procedures, but the principles embodied in plain language work are just effectively what STE is. It's just that STE is more restricted. So I think that there's a place for using the spirit of STE in the specifications, just to make them easier to read and therefore to encourage people to adopt them, which is what we're aiming to do. And I'd be more than happy to help and support that if that is something that would be of value in a separate discussion.
I think that's a conversation for you and Mr. Williams. So, but no, I appreciate that. So, yeah, I mean, just to throw a curveball out there, I was consulting for a client recently where they're actually taking their design engineers and teaching them STE, because what they want is they want the design engineers using the same terminology that essentially the authors are going to be using in the tech pubs down the line. And, you know, where something's called a crush washer over here, it needs to be a crush washer over here, and not a spacer and not some kind of other kind of washer. So I am seeing that. Doesn't answer that question, but I thought it was a fun factoid. So Alan, you asked this question, but I'll read it out for you, and then when I get it technically wrong, you can jump all over me. So Mill Standard 1388 1A, Task 501, I think I'm good so far, for test, evaluation and verification. Is this activity covered in SX000I or S10000I, whichever you prefer? I guess that would be aimed at Dawn, I would have thought.
Yep.
All over a sudden, Dawn can't hear us.
Let me just expand on it. What I see throughout all the standards is very good coverage of the logistics planning functions, i.e. what to do, what you need, where it should be, and all documentation that goes with it. I also see a feedback loop. What I don't see is that you test equipment, but where's the test strategy for logistics support? I don't see logistics evaluation. I don't see an acceptance standard for logistics, which is inconceivable for equipment, but I don't see it in the standards. Now, maybe I've missed it. I think there's a bit of a hole at the end of the planning process, which is acceptance, before you start the feedback loop of 5000F. Now, if I've got that wrong, I'd be delighted to be corrected.
Oh, you're right. You're right. There are no assistants, shall we say, were specific to implementation and establishing strategies. Related to that is the difficulty that we experience with S1000D. S1000D would not know enough about a particular project to be able to establish a strategy for reducing tech pups. But all this ILS activities in the S series is based on and includes ILS activities outside the S series, like LoRa, for example, or obsolescence analysis. It is difficult because of the project specifics, but I think there is space. I think there is a hole at the end of the tunnel, as you say, where we could explain the things that need to be taken into account when establishing a strategy. Not sure whether that would go. Yeah, that would go into S10,000I. I would think, straight off the top of my head.
And I see every other part of the 1388-1A, which was a really, really good document, completely separate from the data part in 2A and 2B. I see every other element has been picked up within parts of the S series, other than test, evaluation, and verification.
So this is fine. I don't think. So S10,009 is set up to be the overarching document and will lay out your support concept and your support strategy. We would not get down into the details of doing a test evaluation type of activity. However, I think if that is a gap that we have in our S series specs, we can certainly create a use case and identify the data elements that go into that and create that as part of one of our specs. I'm just not sure off the top of my head which spec that would go into.
I'm just going to sort of cut in a little bit there, Dawn. I'm not sure whether we'd use S5000F as a sort of feedback loop. And I think that the notion was that although 5000F takes its output from the in-service phase and then feeds back through the other specs, there is a notion, of course, and if you look at the traditional pizza diagram, that you could take output to go back via the 5000F at any point in the cycle. So maybe that's the baseline of what Alan's talking about. Do I test my LoRa at that point before I even go into final delivery and production? I've got a feedback. And I think it was always the case that the customer could request information at any stage out of the pizza diagram and use 5000F as the methodology for recovering that data. So maybe we just need to look at 5000F and be more explicit about the use of that data and how it's fed back and the analysis that's done on that data. But I think the mechanism exists there. It's just I'm not sure we've teased it out properly and made it obvious to people that that's what it's doing.
It probably arises from the actual different viewpoints that the MIL standard and the ASD suite were written. The MIL standard was developed by a government contracting organisation in the States. the ASD suite was largely developed by commercial organisations centric around the EU-based aerospace industry. So most of the people sat in the room were actually suppliers rather than customers. An awful lot of the acceptance of the logistics is done by the customer and can only be done by the customer because it uses the frontline command and the MOD's facilities and all sorts of government furnished stuff that just purely and simply isn't available to the contractor. So, that's probably why it's living in the gap, because there is a bit of a gap there in no uncertain terms. Internally, the MOD's, generates an IT app to do it in the UK. We aren't particularly good at doing that in certain respects either. It's a long-standing issue that realistically, if people properly did the systems engineering, those dotted lines that go across the V that we all ignore, it should be done. It's a case of when you come up with requirements, you should actually come up at the same time. The criteria and the mechanism, how are you going to check you satisfy the requirements? We aren't particularly good at doing it from a systems engineering point of view, and quite often it gets left all the way to the end, and we don't even have a good definition of really what it means to meet the logistics support date for certain classes of project. I've got a top level definition of all the support elements should be there in range but not necessarily scale at that point in time. But what does that mean? Good question in certain circumstances. And we aren't particularly good at it even internally. I don't think it is a bit of a gap area in the UK MOD policy suite, but it's not something that's really the focus in many respects of the contractor, because whilst they have important inputs to it and support quite a lot of the trials and things, they're really run and conducted by the frontline services.
Excellent. I'm going to pull that one to a halt. I think it was a good question, and that falls into the category of a very good question. But I think that we've got it to the right people. We put it on the desk of the people that can actually address that. So, and I'm sure that they'll ring you up and ask you for your input as well. So, so this one, I guess, so this one, I guess you can answer, Phil. So, will projects really get this, understand this, and put all of the energy into this?
Well, that's a really good question, because historically you might argue that a supplier would say, well, I'm not that bothered about making sure that I have a robust through life support policy, because if I'm selling the MOD a piece of equipment, let's call it an aircraft, and it costs £1 million per aircraft, let's say, and if I give it a really strong logistics footprint as well, it's going to be 1.2 million. I get to main gate and the MOD says, but we've only got £1 million. So what do you throw off the aircraft? The extra missiles that you wanted to carry, a bit of speed, whatever it might be, whatever capability? Oh no, I want to keep all that because that's shiny and Gucci and people want to see that. I tell you what I'll do, I'll throw all these technical publications off the back end, and I'll throw off all the through life support analysis that Alan was just talking about now. I'll get the price down to £1 million, and then I'll deliver it to the MOD. The whole point of the direction of travel, the whole point of CDLS, the Chief of Defence Logistics and Support, is he can say, whoa, stop there. If we need to save some money off, find some money somewhere else, but you're not dumping my through life support concepts, and I want the S series to be implemented on my platform. I've got Mr. Barter in DNS who's going to make sure you've applied the standards properly, and if we need to pay for that, of course, then we will pay for it, because we view that as being fundamental to keeping that aircraft flying for the next 40 years and not constantly having to sort of make do and mend as we have done over the past sort of few decades with our kit. Fundamental shift in policy, the red card being given to the logistics support 3-star to stop a project going forward. So to the suppliers out there, I would say you better be doing this research, this work, because if you don't, you won't be on the programme, which is much more like our French colleagues have been for the past sort of decade, where they say if you're not coherent, if you're not applying the standards, you're not on the program, and that applies to the primes and right down to tier 3, 4, 5. So yes, please do the work.
Yeah, and plus we won't need pilots soon, right? So that'll be that will be saving some money as well. So
Alan and I have been saying that for years.
I would think that CDLS is itching to use his red card to prove his power so that he gets less hassle in future and he's a success.
Yes.
So be careful, because he's going to use it very soon.
And to be fair, sorry, that's a good point. But it's not just CDLS in Strat Command. It's also, if you speak to Steve Glass, the 2-star support director at DNS, who works alongside CLS, he will say, "Yeah, and I've got a red card as well." So we can both look at elements of the support cycle and stop a program. And it's the first time I can recall that they've had that power. And you know what people are like? Once they've got power, they like to exercise it. And I think Alan's right. Once you've sent someone off the rugby pitch, you tend to find the rest of them behave better, don't they? So let's see how that goes.
Yeah, I'm constantly shown the red card at home. Normally around camera equipment, but I get told no constantly. So Stuart, I did give you a pre-warning that this is. So Tony Harris has just said he used to be a 4-star. So BAE Systems, who will decide on the specs being used on Tempest, specifically on Tempest?
I suspect that a lot of that's going to be directed by presumably the UK government, to be honest. Currently, I know from the work that's been done on Tempest that they're away off that. I think most of the focus at the moment is still on the fundamentals of the engineering and manufacturing process. And where logistics comes in to play, it's very much in terms of what can we do with the aircraft the product to reduce those costs longer term. So I think it's too early in the process. Don't think anyone's even thinking about that yet. When I've mentioned standards and such like, it's kind of been tumbleweed, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of good guys within BAE Systems that you can talk to, and I think it was clear from your slides the thought processes of BAE. So, you know, where the specifications that you're using. So, so I hope that answers the question for you, Aston. So another question is, for those of us coming from older or legacy versions of specifications, will there be clear guidance on how we can upscale and upgrade our data? I think, Paul, you talked a little bit about it. I think certainly Jamie did, and I think Dawn mentioned something as well. So, so yeah, those coming from older versions of specifications, migrating to newer versions of specifications. Do you want to talk to that, Paul?
Well, at the highest level, Dawn showed a table where that showed which S-series specifications cover activities in other logistics specifications. So that there's a starting point, anyway, at the specification level. I guess then you've got to look at the processes and then look at the inputs and outputs of those processes in the detailed. Well, actually, you could look at it in S10000I Chapter 3 for the process level. And then you've got to get further into the actual data elements. And again, as Alan and I mentioned earlier on about the difficulty in migrating S2000M into S2000M data, you've got to look at the equivalence of the S-series units of functionality and then the data elements themselves. And so it's in all those cases, in my mind, it's a real detailed mapping process. And then finding a way to accommodate any gaps or any differences.
Mm-hmm. And I think certainly those in the area where
I don't really.
Sorry, go on. You saying something else, Paul?
Say that again, sorry.
Sorry, no, I talked over you, then you talked over me. So I think we can continue just talking over each other. I think that would be great. So no, I'm saying certainly in the S1000D arena, going from, there's lots of software vendors out there that will help you going from one version of the spec to another version of the spec, and that, you know, they have mapping tools, and I know that Dr. Mike Day at Rolls-Royce has done loads of stuff in this area as well. So, but I think have another look at Dawn's presentation, because I think she did talk a little bit about some of that, because I highlighted it here. We've got one final question that I want to ask here, because this comes up all of the time, and that's a question of software. Okay, so S1000D, very mature market, lots of people supporting it. S3000L, we're seeing more companies coming on board now, picking that up and helping drive that. Will there be any, I think this is somebody coming from a DITA environment, will there be any software tools or open kits that will be made available by the community to help us adopt these specifications?
Not in the specs.
I don't think there's any plan, Mike, for certainly, you know, the people we've got around the table, the people that have been developing the specs. We're not really in the market, if you like, for that capability. I think what happens is, in a true capitalist state, of course, that we produce the specs, the MDs mandate the use of the specs, and then the market develops a way of helping people to implement them. So it's a little bit of, it'll be driven by that need, I think. And part of the work that we do with things like the CSS TOG I talked about, the training group, is it brings together training organizations that can then sort of say, but we need some software to help do the training, and part of that software implementation will then be how you actually adapt and use the specs as well. So I think we're creating the demand, and then I think the market will come forward with solutions for that.
I agree. Let the vendors do the vendor thing, and let the spec community do the spec community thing. And
years ago, back at the start of ILS, particularly the US DoD created tools to do just that. And they were relatively simple, and they couldn't keep up with them, and the market overtook them, and the US DoD gave up, because it just wasn't cost effective to try and provide these tools to industry when there was a bunch of people, as Phil said, using the capitalist ethic to do it far better.
Yeah.
So I cannot see government providing it. So it'll be suppliers.
And anybody that's been involved in software, and I know most of us on the call have been, it is a perpetual development cycle and support cycle. And the specs need to develop the specs, and the software guys need to develop the software and stick pace with the specs. That's how I think it should work. But
I mean, personally, Mike, as well, I'd quite welcome some of the software developers getting involved with the developments of the specs as well. It would seem logical to me that the people who are helping to people actually to use the specs, could get involved with the development of the specs, maybe to sort of make suggestions to say, if you did it this way, it would be easier for us to implement and for the end customers to actually use. So I've got nothing against those people getting involved.
Yeah, quick, turn your phone off, because it's going to start ringing. So you're going to get all of the guys. No, but I think I said to you a few weeks ago that you've got to involve these guys. You've got to involve the software community. So it makes sense.
This is Dawn.
Yeah, sorry, go on, Dawn. Go on, Dawn.
We are
trying to help with that situation. Sorry, Dawn, carry on.
So our steering committee charters prohibit the developers of the S-Series specifications from leaning towards or participating in any software development. We are required to be software agnostic. We do not allow software companies to come to our steering committee meetings and promote their software. We are completely out of that part of the business. As Phil said, if some software communities would like to review what we're doing and offer comments about how we can improve the specifications, we would certainly welcome that. But we will not advocate for any particular piece of software for any of our specs.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, good point, Dylan. That's absolutely true. We would not want to promote any one company over another, but I think it would be somewhat illogical not to have software expertise helping us develop the specs in the future. If we go back 20 years, the notion of it all being software delivered was perhaps not quite as relevant as it is today. So I think we need to get that level of intelligence around the table as well.
Excellent. Yeah,
Well, I agree with that. I agree with that. The issue is always investment against the return on it and the like. But how do you value influence?
Yes.
So I'm willing to do part of that as one of those software suppliers. But there are just limits. That's
yes.
Yeah, I agree. So, Paul, I know you wanted to add something to that. Did Dawn cover it, or do you want to add something else?
No, you mentioned that the proliferation and a non-stop updating of software to keep up with the specs. Well, many of us that work on the S series actually worked on S1000D, and we recognise that from the feedback from software developers that we were actually perpetuating that problem and costing software developers a lot of money by keep releasing different versions of the specs of S1000D. And that whole 2-year cycle thing, that's kind of one of the reasons that we've gone for that 2-year cycle thing. It's to help with that cost of further developing software to support the specs. And as part of that 2-year cycle, we plan to be letting the world know about what's going to be in that next set of issues. So I mentioned on my last slide about ISMO, ISO, and IPSO and all that optimization stuff. All that's going to be in the 2023 April editions. So that's a heads up, and if you all those concepts, those optimization concepts, we're following the concepts that are already in S4003. So software developer for S3000L would need, or could be looking at S4003 ISMO process for an idea of what he would need for the S3000L ISO process whilst developing his software. I think you can look at the specs in some respects as being software specifications. So in terms of requirements, this is what you need, this is what we're going to do, and so we require that you design software to enable us to do it. And we describe that process, and so it's read the manual time.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone. I think we're pretty much on the hour there from questions. I just want to say, that's all the questions we've had in anyway. There were a couple for Neil Ray, but I won't ask them here. I'll forward them on to him. Obviously, he got sidetracked this afternoon. So I just want to say thank you to everybody that's been on the panel this afternoon. Everyone that's presented today, thanks very much. I'm going to close you guys down. And I'll put you guys on silent, but I will continue because I would just want to say a few thank yous and some kind of closing notices and notes. So guys on the panel, thanks very much. I guess everybody can connect with you on LinkedIn and all of those kind of wonderful things. Just hang around for 5 more minutes, guys, and I will close the conference very, very shortly. But everybody on the call, thank you. I found myself again. So guys, everybody that's been involved over the last 3 days, a huge and massive thank you to everybody. Just making sure that I am live here. So I think I've done okay from an IT perspective. And things have behaved, and things have gone pretty well, I think. So I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody who's given up their time to speak, to sponsor, and those of you, the delegates that have joined us from all around the world. Thank you for that. I know some of you are catching up on some of the recordings. I know that some of you are desperate to get some of the live sessions. I will get to the editing as soon as I can. But speakers, sponsors and delegates, a huge thank you for everything. We have already announced next year's conference. Hopefully we will be in Congressbury again, and we can all get together. And I did get some nice messages yesterday about pine pints and those kind of things. Hopefully we are back on next year, and hopefully we will be at Congressbury. We always do it the week before Thanksgiving, so it gives time for the US contingent to come over. I'm talking about the American, the US Thanksgiving can come over and join in the love. And that leads me to say that happy Thanksgiving to all of our American colleagues. I know it's a big day for you guys, and anybody else around the world. Please stay safe, and happy holidays to if you're celebrating around the world. I know that some of you are still joining some of my training sessions that we've got planned from year to year end, so look forward to doing that. I would deeply appreciate, because this is the first time we've done this, I would deeply appreciate if you could send us your feedback on how this went. How did the format go? What did you like? What didn't you like? More importantly, because we can try and improve that. But some of the comments that we've had, some of the feedback that we've had is very much that you guys have enjoyed it, you've liked it, and the format has worked. Okay, we haven't been able to get together. Even if we could have got together, we wouldn't have been able to shake hands and have a hug like we normally do. So if I have promised you something, I'm very good at promising things. If I've promised you something, please do prod me, and I will make sure I get it to you. And because always after these events, I have a tremendous amount of actions that I need to follow. And sometimes something does fall through the cracks. I'm Michael Ingledew. I hope you enjoyed the 3 days. A massive thank you and a massive shout out to ASD, who did supply some excellent presenters today. So I hope that it was useful. I hope you learned something. I know I did get some messages from people saying that your brains have been fried, and all of this big data stuff. And get into it, learn it. It's really inspiring. It's really interesting. And I am going for my pie and a pint, and I promised my two girls in my life, my wife and my daughter, a Wagamamas for tea. So that's our celebration. So until next year, guys, thanks very much. I'm shutting down the conference. Look forward to speaking to you all soon.